everybody, welcome back to Daydreams of Quilts on YouTube. Today we are making this block. I don't know what it's called. If you know the name of it, leave me a comment down below. I'm using it to bust some scraps in my stash, so it's a great scrap buster quilt, and it makes the finished block will be 16 inches. So it makes a pretty good size block. I'm starting out with 9 blocks and see how far that gets me on a quilt. But you're going to need 48 2.5 inch squares of a print and 8 4.5 inch squares of a solid for each block. So I'm doing each block a different color, so I'm using a different solid for the larger pieces. But if you want to make all of these the same solid, like a cream or something, that would be fine too. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so the first step is to sew all the corner square triangles onto the solid pieces. So you're going to do one in one corner, just sew from corner to corner. If you want to draw a line on the back to follow, you can do that. Or if you want to draw a line on your machine like I did in my last video, the one about selling quilts on Etsy, you can follow the line on your machine. So you just do these two, and then we'll come back to the cutting board and trim. Okay, and once those seams are all sewn, we're just going to line up the 1/4 inch line from our ruler onto the seam and just trim away the corner and just leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we'll do that for all 8 of the solid squares. And then we're just going to press our corners out, and we'll just press the seam allowance towards the corner on those. Okay, so we'll just press these out. And then this is all we really have to do for prepping to put the block together, other than cutting, which we've already done. And then once these are all pressed, we'll be ready to sew our block together. So the way I did mine was I first pieced the 8 by 8 patch in the middle, this patch right here. So the main thing with sewing these patches is just to make sure you don't have 2 of the same fabrics side by side or touching in the patchwork, just to make it look nice and random. So we're sewing all of these with a 1/4 inch seam. And if you have a directional fabric like these little deer, then just be aware of that. However you're wanting them to face, make sure you're putting that directional the right way. Okay, so this is our first row of our 16 patch in the center, and we will continue making rows until we have 4. And just be aware of your fabric placement, like I said, that they're evenly distributed in your block. Okay, so here's our rows for the center 16 patch. So I'm going to press this way and this way and this way and this way. So from left to right, right to left, left, right, right to left. So that way our seams will nestle together once we put it all together. They're called nesting seams. Okay, so once I put it together, the seams will go in opposite directions here, all the way along the row. And that just cuts down on the bulk and the seam allowance and makes it easier to get it accurately pieced so that the corners all match up. Okay, so I will just sew all of this together, and then we'll come back to the pressing board and press from top to bottom. Okay, so here's our block, our center block, 16 patch put together. So we're just going to press all of those row seams in one direction from top to bottom. And I'll just flip it over and make sure there's no little folds on the front. Okay, so there's the center. And now what we're going to do is lay out the solid squares around that. Okay, so that we can see where we're at with our prints and make sure that we don't have the same prints touching on the block once we have these solid pieces added in. And I'm also just trying to keep my deer the right way up if I can. Okay, so we're good here. There's these ones are, none of these are touching a similar, oh, this one is. Let's see. Maybe I'll go like this. And my deer is still the right way up. All right, so now none of the same are touching here. So the next part is to make our 4 patches for the 4 corners. And we want to do the same thing, just sort of lay them out so you can make sure that your fabrics are evenly distributed and they aren't having the same fabrics touching each other. So we'll just do that for all 4 corners. And then we're going to sew these 2 together and these 2 together and press the seams in opposite directions like we did before. And then put them together and press from top to bottom on each of the 4 patches. So I'll just keep laying these out. Okay, I just about have them all put on here. Uh-oh, I have too many of the same for that one. So let's swap this one and maybe this one here. There we go. So just give a quick check and make sure all of these are different fabrics. And we're good. So we can start putting our whole block together now. Okay, I've got the first 2 for the 4 patch in the top left. So I'll press those in opposite directions. Okay, and then I will just put them together and sew that center seam and press from top to bottom. Okay, and here's the other one for the top right corner. Okay, so now we're ready to put this row together. So we can sew these together, and then we'll sew these two seams and attach them to the center, and then we'll sew this one, and then we will put it all together. Okay, so this top row is put together. Now I'm going to sew the center seams on these two. And I'm pressing these two seams towards the top of the block because the other seam that they're meeting up with is going the other direction, it's going towards the bottom of the block. So I want to get my nesting seams happening there again. And I did the same thing with this. I pressed it the opposite of the way that this seam was going. Okay, so now I'm going to press the two side seams. Maybe just give the other ones a little press along the way. Oops, I'm losing pieces. Okay, and then we're just going to flip this down on top and sew this seam right here. And then we're just doing the bottom row and then we're done. Okay, so I've sewn these two together. I've sewn my 2 4 patches. Now I'm just going to finish putting this row together and attach it to this square, and our block will be finished. Okay, so there we go. It's all put together. And this is a great way to use up scraps in your stash. This was all layer cake squares that I had left over from an Elizabeth Hartman greenhouse quilt. And so I cut up layer cake squares, but you could use jelly rolls and charm squares. And so once you get all of your blocks sewn and you put them together, you can see that these solids are going to make a really nice secondary pattern across the quilt on the diagonals. So I'm excited to see how it comes together. All right. So thank you for sewing along with me today. I hope you found a new way to use up some of your stash or your scraps and make a scrap quilt with them. And don't forget to give me a like and subscribe and hit that notification bell to be notified of the next video that I put up. Thanks for sewing along with me today.